Gary Trent has a really bright future ahead of him. Let's get into this. Gary Trent was drafted 37th overall in the 2018 NBA Draft by the Sacramento Kings and then traded to the Portland Trailblazers for cash and 2 second-round picks. No one could have really seen this coming, but what an absolute steal for the Portland Trailblazers to get a guy like Gary Trent for basically nothing. But as most second-round picks start, Gary Trent really had a slower start to his NBA career, not even getting too many minutes and only averaging 2.7 points in his first season. But what Gary Trent was a 3-and-D type player, and every team in the NBA needs that. And due to that and the fact that he kept working at his game, he got more and more minutes and got better and better as his career progressed. In his next season with the Portland Trailblazers, Gary Trent moved up to 9 points per game and 44% from the field, and where he really started to become a household name was in the NBA bubble, where he averaged 14 points per game, but what was really the most impressive part of his game was he was shooting 48% from 3 and making over 3 per game on 6.7 attempts per game. But in Portland, Gary Trent was more of a 3-and-D type guy because they had guys handling the ball like CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard, and Gary Trent definitely fit in really well with them, but he wasn't able to use his full abilities, obviously. But at this season's trade deadline, the Portland Trailblazers traded Gary Trent to the Toronto Raptors for Norman Powell. So far, this trade is looking like an absolute robbery for the Toronto Raptors, because before the trade, Norman Powell was having the season of his life, averaging 19 points per game, and he was on an expiring contract. But Gary Trent has been playing way better than Norman Powell has ever played. And after the season, if the Trailblazers want to keep Norman Powell, they have to pay him a pretty decent contract because he's been playing great this year. But with Gary Trent, he's a young guy under a really team-friendly contract for a few years. And that's exactly what you want from any team, but especially a team like the Toronto Raptors, who are a young, rebuilding team. You want to acquire assets like a guy like Gary Trent, as well as obviously draft picks. But as I said before, Gary Trent is more of a 3-and-D type player in Portland, but ever since he got traded to Toronto Raptors, he really opened up his game and really proved that he has the ability to be a true scorer in this league. Gary Trent even put up an incredible 44-point game recently, and that's obviously way more than just a 3-and-D type player. He could really be a true scorer in this league, and that's something that I feel the Portland Trailblazers didn't take into account and maybe didn't realize. And it's not necessarily their fault. They have Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, who obviously take the ball up and have the ball in their hands most of the time. So a guy like Gary Trent wasn't really able to fully see his potential. But on the Raptors, especially now that they're rebuilding and they don't have as many scorers as they once did, he could really take advantage of that and prove that he's a great player in this league. Gary Trent is still an amazing shooter and one of the top shooters in the NBA, to be honest with you. But in Toronto, Gary Trent has also proven that he's an above average handle and ability to get to the basket with that handle, and also just his athleticism. Trent has definitely shown an ability to do that in flashes in Portland, but he really wasn't doing it consistently, but it wasn't his fault necessarily. It was more, as I said before, due to the fact that Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum were on his team, and obviously they require the ball in their hands most of the time. The Toronto Raptors were definitely having a pretty rough season this year, and that was mostly the reason why they traded Norman Powell anyway, because he was on an expiring contract and they were more going towards the route of rebuilding. But when you add a dynamic scorer like Gary Trent to your roster, he could really help them change their season around this year, or if not, just in the future. Having a guy like that is obviously amazing. Looking at the trade, I think the Portland Trailblazers got absolutely robbed, and if you just look based on the fact of contracts, you have two guys who have somewhat similar play styles. Obviously, Norman Powell is way better getting to the basket and way more athletic, but Gary Trent is a way better shooter. But they kind of play similar roles, but Gary Trent is younger and has a more team-friendly contract for more seasons, and Norman Powell is on an expiring deal and you have to pay him a lot. So just looking at the contracts, I feel like the Raptors definitely won that deal. But now you look at the actual players, and Norman Powell, to be fair to him, has been having a breakout season and the best season of his career. But when you look at the fact that Gary Trent is way younger than Norman Powell, and on top of that, he potentially has a better future than Norman Powell, now it really looks like a bad trade and potentially looks like the Blazers got robbed. And especially if the Blazers don't re-sign Norman Powell after this season, it's going to look even worse because they just traded a young and up-and-coming star, or at least a very good player in Gary Trent, and if they don't re-sign Norman Powell, they got nothing back for him. It just really puts the Blazers in a bad spot because Norman Powell might know that the Blazers kind of have to re-sign him at this point, and he might make them pay more for him, which would put them in an even worse position going forward in the long term. And this isn't a hate video, obviously, on Norman Powell. I really like his game. He's super athletic. He's been shooting the 3-ball great this season, and he's having the season of his career, averaging 19 points per game. He's really improved his game. But I just think when you look at the actual trade and how well Gary Trent is playing and the contract he's on and the fact that he's younger and potentially has a higher ceiling, it's just a bad trade for the Blazers. And the Toronto Raptors deserve a ton of credit because a guy like Norman Powell was a guy they weren't going to re-sign anyway because they're trying to rebuild from now on. So to trade a guy that they weren't going to re-sign anyway for a guy who's looking as good as Gary Trent is, it's just, I don't know if you could make a better move than that. But to be fair to both sides, this obviously could just be a very hot stretch for Gary Trent and he might come back down to earth eventually. But let's just say that's true and that's the worst case scenario for Gary Trent. If he just becomes a nice 3-and-D player, that's still very valuable to the Toronto Raptors, and I would still say they won the deal. But I just think when watching Gary Trent on the Toronto Raptors, I think he's more than just a 3-and-D type player. I think he's definitely proven the ability to get to the basket with an above average handle to do that. And I think he could really be way better than just a 3-and-D type player. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Gary Trent could potentially be better than just a 3-and-D type player? And do you think the Toronto Raptors got an absolute steal in Gary Trent? Or do you think Gary Trent is no more than a 3-and-D player and the Portland Trailblazers might have won that trade? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps me out a lot. Until the next time, peace out, guys.